Welcome to This Explainer. We're looking at a political landscape right now that is fundamentally shifting, literally right beneath our feet. For decades, election math was, well, pretty straightforward, right? You count the red voters, you count the blue voters, and then you duke it out for that tiny sliver of undecideds in the middle. But those old rules of red versus blue election math, yeah, they're officially breaking down. We are entering this era of unprecedented disruption, and the map as we know it is basically being completely rewritten.
Okay, let's dive right into this, because this is the core question keeping political strategists wide awake at night right now. Can an independent candidate, someone totally unattached to the traditional party machinery, actually win in a state that is deeply historically red? What's really fascinating here is that even the Democratic Party is starting to recognize this shift. In places where they usually really struggle to compete, we're seeing Democrats stepping back and actually backing independent candidates. They're making a massive bet that a moderate, unaligned candidate can build a much broader coalition than a traditional partisan ever could.
Just look at this quote from a Democratic strategist in Arizona. They said, "I just think trying to predict anything right now, you might as well shake a magic 8-ball and see what it tells you." I mean, that perfectly captures the chaotic energy of this moment. Both major parties are absolutely sweating right now. The traditional playbooks are just being tossed right out the window, and these unconventional races are injecting a massive dose of uncertainty into the whole system.
Section 1. The end of predictability. Breaking the red versus blue mold.
So we're watching true independents and highly polarizing figures totally disrupt traditional two-party assumptions. Races that used to be a guaranteed lock for one side or the other, they're suddenly turning into these volatile, unpredictable battlegrounds. Throughout this explainer, we're going to trace a core narrative. We're looking at 3 specific types of disruption hitting the map right now. First, the absolute chaos of a three-way split. Second, the rise of the blue-collar independent. And third, the unexpected vulnerability of supposedly safe seats. These 3 factors are completely upending how we project power in Washington.
Section 2. Chaos in the desert. Arizona's unpredictable Senate race.
Now, what's really interesting here is how it frames Arizona not just as a political contest, but almost like a complex mathematical puzzle. Look at the sheer volume of voters who just refuse to pick a side here. 35% unaffiliated, 35% Republican, and only 35% registered Democrat. This massively complicates any tidy assumptions about who's going to win. You literally can't just rely on your base here. Those unaffiliated voters, they're tied for the largest voting bloc in the state, which makes Arizona the ultimate wildcard.
And that wildcard status is perfectly embodied by the actual players on the board. You've got Kyrsten Sinema, the incumbent, who actively left the Democratic Party to become an independent. Now, by doing that, she avoided a brutal primary fight, sure, but she basically guaranteed a highly chaotic general election. Then you have Ruben Gallego, the Democratic challenger, pushing for a jolt to the left, and Kari Lake, a really polarizing conservative rock star with a fiercely loyal base. So both Gallego and Lake represent their respective parties' ideological flanks, leaving Sinema to try and somehow thread the needle right down the middle.
Former Sinema aide John LaBombard summed this up perfectly. He called it a pick-your-own-adventure, pointing out that if a two-way race is impossible to predict, well, this is exponentially harder to predict. And here is why this matters so much for us. The stakes literally couldn't be higher. In a three-way race in such a divided state, even a tiny fraction of votes peeled away by a third-party candidate could tip the whole thing, and whoever tips this race could very well decide the balance of power for the entire United States Senate.
Section 3. The Independent Blueprint. Bypassing partisan gridlock in red states.
Moving away from that three-way chaos in Arizona, let's pivot to a totally different kind of disruption taking root in places like Nebraska and Montana. And this brilliantly illustrates a sharp contrast in strategies. On one side, you have the traditional party-backed strategy, right? Relying on the base, national platforms, and heavy partisan CAC funding. Think of candidates like Republican Kurt Alme in Montana, leaning hard into traditional conservative platforms. But then, look at the new independent strategy. Candidates like Seth Bodnar in Montana or Dan Osborn in Nebraska, they're running as entirely unaligned. They're rejecting corporate PACs and trying to appeal directly to voters who are just deeply frustrated with both major parties.
This strategy has actually birthed a rising political archetype, the blue-collar independent. This is basically a candidate leveraging a working-class background and cross-partisan economic policies to pull voters from both the left and the right. And the absolute prime example of this right now is Nebraska's Dan Osborn. He's an industrial mechanic, a Navy veteran, a union leader, and he has entirely rejected the two-party system.
His platform is essentially a masterclass in breaking the traditional mold. Let's look at it. He wants to overturn Citizens United. He wants to enact strict term limits. He's advocating for right-to-repair laws for consumers and the military, basically stopping defense contractors from locking the military out of repairing its own equipment.
He takes absolutely no corporate PAC money. And he supports targeted strategic tariffs rather than blanket tariffs. It's this incredibly precise mix of traditionally left-wing and right-wing populist goals, all designed to completely bypass partisan gridlock.
Now, the reason the political establishment is actually taking this seriously is this number right here, 53.2. That is the percentage that incumbent Republican Senator Deb Fischer won by against Osborn in the 2024 regular general election. She only got 53.2% of the vote. It was this near sneak attack that proved the independent blueprint is incredibly viable. And because of that surprisingly tight margin, Osborn's 2026 race against Nebraska's other senator, Pete Ricketts, is now being viewed as a highly serious battleground.
Section 4. When safe seats stumble. The vulnerability factor in Florida and Tennessee.
All right, let's transition from the Senate down to the House races. According to recent reports, districts previously rated as solid Republican holds are actively being downgraded by handicappers to just likely Republican. Why? Well, it's due to twin vulnerabilities, ethics issues, and weak fundraising. The Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, the DCCC, is actually targeting incumbents like Corey Mills in Florida and Andy Agles in Tennessee. They're betting that ongoing misconduct allegations are fundamentally deteriorating these campaigns' ability to actually function and raise money.
To understand just how weak that functioning has become, check out this figure, $200,000. That is all Tennessee Representative Andy Agles managed to raise over the last 2 quarters of 2025. I mean, that is a remarkably low fundraising number for a sitting incumbent, and it coincides directly with an ongoing investigation into alleged campaign finance violations. And you know what? It gets even tighter in Florida. $60,000. That was the Q4 2025 fundraising total for Representative Corey Mills. For a candidate who historically easily cleared well over $100,000 a quarter, this drop is just massive. And it's happening amid some very serious allegations against him regarding stolen valor and domestic violence. So the crucial point here is captured perfectly by a GOP strategist who frankly admitted there is very serious concern within the party about these two. Think about it. Even if these incumbents manage to win their respective primaries, their general election prospects are seriously damaged. With a glaring lack of funding coming in from Speaker Mike Johnson's central committees, and these looming scandals providing just endless campaign fodder, these supposedly safe seats are suddenly incredibly vulnerable.
Section 5. The new Senate math. Recalculating the political map. Let's move to the summary and see how this all builds together. We've looked at some pretty disparate races across the country, right? But they all point to one major recalculation of the map. In the purple battleground of Arizona, that Sinema, Gallego, and Lake dynamic threatens a chaotic 3-way vote split. In deep red Nebraska, the Ricketts and Osborn race is testing the pure power of the blue-collar independent, and down in Florida and Tennessee, embattled incumbents Mills and Agles are showing us how scandals and weak fundraising can put completely safe seats right onto the radar.
What you should really take away from all of this is actually quite simple. The old rules of red versus blue election math are officially breaking down. Whether it's through independent spoilers splitting the vote, populist crossovers appealing to the working class, or incumbent implosions draining campaign war chests, the two major parties, they just can't rely on automatic safe seats anymore. They literally have to fight for every single inch against threats they aren't traditionally built to fight.
Which leaves us with this final provocative thought. What actually happens to the future of the two-party system when unpredictable independents become the most viable path to victory? If voters and strategists keep turning away from traditional partisan candidates and continue to embrace this chaos, the political map won't just be recalculated, it's going to be completely redrawn. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep your eyes on these races because the disruption, it's really just getting started.